SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, welcome to the course An Introduction to Disability Studies. As we discussed in the first lecture, why disability studies is very prominent and significant in contemporary scenario, why this discipline is being included in every other universities, what are the questions that disability studies raises before us, and why we all need to come and do research associated with disability studies. More importantly, it's not only about the research, but also about that everyone should engage, everyone should read what disability studies is discussing, talking and engaging between people or around us. So, disability studies, as we all know, we discussed in the first lecture, that is an interdisciplinary field, which means to say that object of study is different and the methodology is taken from history, sociology, psychology, political science, so on and other department. And we also discussed the one very important question that with disability studies, it's not only that it concerns only with people with disabilities, but any other minority identity is important concern of disability studies, right. So, the third thing that we discuss is that how concern that it has in India and how the concern it has in the West is very much different, and that is why when we are working in India and picking up issues of disability, we are not supposed to impose every theories or methodologies borrowed from the West. The fourth very important, that why is it so that people or researchers or intellectuals did not engage with, did not talk about disability studies or people with concerns of raised concerns of people with disabilities in past decades. Why it is a current important phenomena, why it is being talked today, why is it so that it was not included in academic culture despite the population emerging who are disabled and are very much now speaking about the concerns associated with disability studies, but it was constantly neglected, it was constantly marginalized, it was never came into the picture. The important thing that I also discussed in the last class was that how literature, film, media, magazines have misrepresented people with disabilities and how we can raise the concern or the question on the representation of people with disabilities, right. So, these are the important questions that I raised, I talked, I discussed in the last lecture, and also told you that how disability studies is very extensive field, limiting it that it only talk about people with disability is a very unjust, is injustice with this important field, but rather it takes up every concern that is related to that is marginalized, that is not brought into the main picture, or any narratives or any voices which are not included, right. So, therefore, we all need to talk and discuss this area extensively, raise these important concerns and engage, and I am very happy and thankful to national education policy that it has entirely changed academic culture or academic syllabi and asking students to engage with the different courses. So, now we have a freedom, like as a student that we can opt for a subject which we are free to read and study, because it was a case that if a person even want to study, but if he is from science stream, academically he cannot engage, but he has to just read some books if he is interested. But now, because of national education policies, it is given freedom to the students that if you want to study disability studies, if he is interested to know this field a better way, he can go to the other department or other faculty and engage with these courses. And more importantly, this SwayamPrabha, as you all know, is now credit course, and this is also very extremely influential now in shaping your understanding and beneficial, right. So, in this background, we are moving to the lecture number 2, where we are going to speak about terms associated with disability studies. Why are we going to talk about terms associated with disability studies, right? You can ask this question, but in my teaching experience, in the last 10 years of my teaching experience, I have seen in my department, as you know that I come from Department of English, Banaras Hindu University, and I also have moved from different universities, have been talking about or meeting people and discussing them. What I really realized that most of our students, they use the terms, but they don't know what does it mean, what it refers to, how this terms is associated with disability studies. In fact, you will be shocked to know that people who are working in this field, in fact, they think that the person who is suffering from or who has a particular disease, he is disabled, right. And that was my constantly problem, that disease and disability, they two are different category. They should not be synonymously. They should not be talked as if they are both the same. They share the concerns, but they are not the same, right. And so, in this way, you will see that there are many terms, there are many key terms, lexicon associated with disability studies, which are being talked, but people don't know, and which is why lecture number 2 I am just dedicated it to for your convenient, so that you can understand it better way, that what are the terms, important terms associated with disability studies. It will give you clarity and clear picture that when a thinkers or disability scholars talk about a particular term, what do they mean by that particular keywords, right. So, this is why this lecture number 2 is going to talk about disability key terms, right. So, moving to the slide, first slide, here you see that I am talking about, in the first slide, there are 4 important terms. The one is impairment, second is disability, third is handicap, and fourth one is ableism, right. You will be very surprised to know that every person who does research in this field, some way or other way, in maybe in interview, or let's say for example in viva voce, or let's say for example in seminar or in presentation, they are asked what is the difference between impairment and disability, right. I have seen it, I have seen students being asked this question, and also because these are the questions significant, because most of the time people think that a person who is impaired and the person who is disabled, they are the same. No, they are not the same. Even if you will be surprised, WHO has defined these 3 terms differently, right. And every scholar, when they talk about impairment, they are referring to something else. When they talk about disability, they are speaking about something else, and when they are talking about handicap, they are speaking about something else. And which is why you will be noticing that most of the time when you go to the places, right, I am sure that when I was traveling, still I travel, but what I mean to say, when the first time when I noticed that on railway coaches, it is written for physically challenged people, for disabled people. So sometimes I get confused that why people think that physically challenged and disabled are synonymous to each other. That's not, they are like, the two terms are not synonymous to each other. Policymakers should use these terms very carefully. When these two terms are being used, they are being referred to a separate section, the separate problem, separate concern, right. I would say to say that disabled people is not impaired, or impaired people is not disabled, or maybe both, or maybe the same, right. So these are the different terms. Let's look at the first one, impairment. What do you mean by impairment? Impairment, look at this, is very significant, and make sure that you never lose the grip on it. Refers to a loss, limitation, or abnormality in the structure or a function of the body or mind. That is a key. Remember this. It is a physiological or functional condition that might affect an individual's ability to perform certain tasks. For example, for your convenience, I have given you example as well. A person with a visual impairment has a loss or limitation in their vision, right. So what does it mean? Impairment simply suggests that, suppose for example medically, right, suppose for example medically it is considered that we should all have 2 hands, 2 legs, 2 eyes, 1 nose, 2 ears, right. This is how physiologically a body has been defined in medical institutions, right. Again, I have a problem over there philosophically, ontologically as well, but let us not get into this for now. Maybe when we proceed, we can question this, but for now we should hold ourselves back from here, right. So what do you mean to say that? Let us say for example, if you do not have 2 hands but 1 hand, right, as medical institution normally thinks that 2 hand is being more like normal than having 1 hand, right. Having 2 hands is normal than having 1 hand. So this is, if simply this condition is called impairment, all right. Let us say for example, you can't see, so because you don't have eyes. So again this is called impairment. Again I am saying that don't get into the philosophical ontological question or conceptually that the seeing means a different thing. No, what I am simply talking about simple things, how medical institution speaks about a body. So when you are not able to see something because of a loss of your vision, this condition is defined as an impairment, right. This is simple idea of impairment. Coming to the second term, look at the slides. Disability. Disability is a broader concept that encompasses impairment and focuses on the interaction, look at this term, interaction between individuals with impairment, that is interaction 1, interacting with what? Barriers present in the environment. It refers to the limitations or restrictions on an individual's ability to engage in activities or participate in society due to societal or environmental barrier. That is a key here, that is a key. So for example, when a person with visual impairment may face disability when encountering barriers like inaccessible websites or buildings, right. So here you see that disability is very, very, very different from what impairment is. Disability is maybe a result of being impaired. Let me put it this way for your simple understanding. As we explained, as we talked about, that impairment is talking about a loss, right? Loss of your vision, loss of your hand, loss of your legs, right? This is simply impairment. But when due to this impairment, let us say for example, you want to access certain buildings, and that building, suppose you are physically handicapped, you do not have legs. If you do not have legs, right, and you want to access a building, but it does not have a ramp, it has a stairs. And that interaction, because of the stairs, you are not able to access that building. That interaction create the condition of someone being disabled. So, his impairment is now transformed in disability, right. So far when he is in the house or she is in the house, she is accessing everything pretty good. So far she cannot be called disabled, she is only impaired. But the moment certain hindrance created because of the societal structure, because of the environment barriers, then it is called disabled, right. So, this is what called someone being impaired and now someone being disabled, right. I am sure that this is so clear so far, right. Moving to the third term, that is a handicap. Look at this. It refers to a person with a certain kind of a physical or cognitive impairment which restrict his physical ability to achieve the goals of his life or hinders his growth by several impediments. Simple way I would say and explain this to you, so that you do not need to struggle with. For example, that because of your impairment, you are not able to perform a social cultural role assigned to you, then you will be called handicap. Let us say for example, because of my impairment, if I am not able to play a role of a father, then I will be called a handicapped person. So, what does this mean? It simply means that it is something denoted to performing a social role, right, a role that is assigned to you by the society. If you are not able to play and perform that role, then that is a condition of being someone being handicapped, right. So, here you see being impaired, being disabled and being handicapped is three different conditions and situations, right. So, therefore, my humble request to all of you is that never ever use these three terms synonymously, right. They all are different, right. Okay. Moving to the next term, that is called ableism, right. Ableism is a different understanding. Let us look at the slide first. Ableism is a term employed to characterize prejudiced attitudes and discriminatory behavior exhibited by individuals without disabilities, right. Without disabilities, often referred to as abled bodies towards those with disabilities, right. The concept of ableism is rooted in societal perception of normal ability. Essentially, ableism plays a role in erecting barriers that hinder the full participations and inclusion of people with disabilities. So, what is ableism, right? Let us say for example, when you say you are suffering from ableism, right, you carry the attitude of ableism. It simply means that when you project, when you give certain attitudes which is imposed on people with disabilities, and that attitude has a discriminatory behavior towards people with disabilities, right, and that particular behavior is called ableism, suffering from ableist attitude. So, being like carrying ableist assumptions, which means to say that you want everyone to behave the way able body behaves. You want, like, the assumption is that why you should be like this, you should do something like this, you should create something like this. That assumptions, that notion has ableist attitudes, right. So, ableism is a kind of a attitude or assumptions which are imposed on people with disabilities, and it has a discriminatory attitudes because it expects, right, it expects people with disabilities to behave like able bodies behave, able bodies. So, whatever the action able bodies perform, if disabled body is not able to perform, then if there is a discrimination, then it is considered to be ableist attitudes, right. So, ableist attitude, simply in one line you can say, assumptions imposed on disabled people that they should be like able bodies, or they should also behave like other able bodies do. All right, this is ableism. Moving to the next slides, what Terry Eagleton has to say about ableism is the set of assumptions and practices that promote unequal treatment of people because of apparent or assumed physical, mental, behavioral differences. So, ableism promotes unequal, that is very important, right. Look at this, unequal treatment, not only for people with disabilities, but also for other minority groups. As I have been constantly advocating that disability studies does not only speak about disabled identities, right. It also speak about other minority identities, and as this quote specifically speak about that, because of ableism, it is not only that people with disabilities suffer, but also other minority identities they also suffer. For example, masculinities, right. So, when masculinity studies emerged, it started speaking about that because of the prevalent notion of masculinity imposed on everyone, not only women suffer, but also there are a lot of men who also fail to perform or behave like the expectations of masculine people have from other. So, because of this particular assumptions, the discrimination exists, and that is why we all need to come together and question the very notion of ableism. And as I move forward, you will see that ableism has a direct connection. Ableism is directly associated with masculinities, right, because they both share more or less the same idea and the same assumptions, right. I will speak more on it when I will talk about identities and other lectures, right. Looking at this next slide, where you see disease, what it talks about? It refers to a pathological condition of a part, organ or system of an organism resulting from various causes such as infection, genetic defect or environmental stress. It often involves specific physiological changes or abnormalities that can be diagnosed and treated. Example is, influenza is a disease caused by influenza virus. It manifests with symptoms such as fever, cough and body aches. Medical professional can diagnose influenza based on specific signs, and treatment may involve antiviral medications, right. So, here you see that I have been talking about, or like I was giving a hint, that disease is not a disability, right. Again, when I am saying this, what I am saying talking about is this, that a diseased body has to be analyzed and understood differently than a disabled body is being analyzed or understood or treated. Why is it so, right? Because as this, you know, that a person suffering from influenza virus, like having a cough, may lead to disability, but it is not disability, all right. So, saying that every diseased body is a disability, that is where we are confusing with disability, and what would happen? We will end up doing injustice with disabled, and that is why I always say that a person who has a disability or who has a disease, it is not that they are not supposed to go and meet a doctor, but doctors should not treat a disability as if it is a disease, right. So, this is a very thin line that we need to keep it separate, so that we are not confused, we should not misunderstand, right? Because disability has a very different concern. Disability looking for more changes to be done in the society so that maximum people can be accommodated in a society, right? Let us say for example, old people, right? How are you going to place the, where are you going to place old people? Are you going to say that old people are disabled or diseased, right? I am going to align more with disability, like the old people is disabled, not diseased, right? Because it is a natural condition. At one point of time, everyone has to go through that, everyone has to go through that condition. So, everyone has to become old at one point of time. So, it is not that they should go to a doctor and they should say, I want to be young, right? It is absolutely they should have a nutrition, food or vitamins, that is a different thing. But what we need to have more empathetic attitudes. We need to think innovatively, technologically, that there should be ramps or lifts so that old people can access all those offices or premises which are meant for every other members of the society. Unlike or other way around, that no, we will not build the society like which is accessible for all, but rather you have to come and comply with these notions. No, right. So, that is the question that I am raising and making a difference between diseased and disabled, right. So, they both are different entity, different individuals. There are connection, but there are also not connections. So, we are very careful what kind of a research project we are taking up, what kind of a concerns we are raising, and how we are reading and how we are thinking about it. All right. So, look at the more differences which I am going to. So, look at it, right. The key differences between disability and disease, right. This is what I wanted to talk more detailed way. I wanted to talk more in detailed way for a very particular notion, as I say, that most of us are very confused when we look at a diseased body or disabled body, or when we think that whether this particular category is going to be called disabled or this particular category is going to be called a diseased, right. And which is why I have taken this term more seriously. Look at the first one, that is a nature. In terms of a nature, what disease does? It focuses on a specific pathological condition affecting the body or mind, right. It focuses on a specific pathological condition that affect body and mind. What does disability do? Now, look at the slide. It encompasses limitations in functioning often resulting from a variety of factors including diseases, injuries, congenital conditions, right. So, basically what I mean to say that disease, someone is a diseased body in terms of nature because of a pathological condition, right, and someone is a disabled because of socio-cultural conditions, right. So, you are suffering from or you are having a particular flu or let's say fever or a cold because of a certain like changes in your physiology, right. That is why you are called diseased. But you are disabled because there is a society, there is a culture, there is a outside environment responsible for making you feel disabled. All right. So, this is one major difference when we see disease versus disability. Look at the second difference, temporal aspect. Disease often implies a specific period of illness with identifiable symptoms and a potential course of treatment or recovery. Disability may be a long-term or permanent condition that affects daily life and functioning over an extended period, right. Temporal, the second. What I mean to say, what I mean by this, in terms of a disease, when you have a disease, it simply suggests that there is a possibility that it can be cured, right. Today you are suffering from a fever, you are taking a bed rest, you don't want to attend a college, you cannot go to certain shops, you cannot do a party with your friends. This is because you are having a fever. But next day, when you are diagnosed that you have a fever, obviously you got some medicines, and now you are well and fit. You can go to college, you can attend lectures, you can do a party, you can do everything which you are not able to do because of disease, right? So, it can be cured. Disability is something maybe or may not be cured, and that is a problem, because there are scholars, they contest this idea that disability can be cured, and this attitude, they contest with this attitude that disability is a disease that has to be cured. No, it is not a disease, first thing, and it has not to be cured, but rather it demands more active participation from the people to change the environment and bring more improvements in the social barriers, right. So, my dear students, what I am here arguing is that if you have a disability, suppose if you don't have a hand, and let us say for example, certain institutions, they do not have a ramp, and every day you go with the wheelchairs and you have to suffer or you have to struggle with that stairs. Today, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, you go to meet any physician, you go to meet any doctors, this is not going to be changed. It can only be changed, you can only access the building when people remove that barriers and make it accessible for you, right. So, this is what I mean by say temporal aspect, that how disability and disease are different. Look at the third criteria, look at these slides now, diagnosis and treatment, right. So, disease can be diagnosed based on medical tests, symptoms and physiological changes. Treatment may involve medication, surgery, other medical intervention. Disability diagnosing a disability involves assessing limitations in functioning. Treatment and management may include rehabilitation, assistive devices, support services rather than medical cures, right. So, this is what I was talking about. The difference is this, that through the surgery, through the other medical treatments, disease can be cured, but for disability it is more on working on the environment, right. So, I have made this point pretty clear. So, I am pretty sure that now whenever people ask you what is the difference between disease and disability, you will not struggle. It will be clear to you. You can make this definition understandable for others as well, right. So, let us move to the next slides now, right. One more thing is that it more focuses on, I have already explained it, so I will just read it out for you. Focuses on specific dysfunction or abnormality within the body, and disability focuses on impact on the conditions on person's ability to perform daily activities and participate fully in society, right. So, I have already talked about it. So, there is a complete chapter on disability and norms, but before I go and talk about the chapters, it is extremely significant and important that I introduce to you what norms is, right. What is a norm? Because people say social norm, cultural norm, political norm, religious norm, this is something called normal, this is not normal. What does this mean, right? As a scholar, as a student, we should understand that whatever we listen, whatever is very popularized in everyday discourse, you must not take each word into the account and think that they have no political impact, right. It is like normal. People say, it is so normal, right. Oh, really? I thought it is normal for you to do this. Understand this, that it is more political. We need to talk more about why these terms are used. I will talk about language as well, but for now, let us focus on what is norms, right, and how norms is important term to know in disability studies. Trust me that, I am sure that I will be speaking about for the lectures, and I will talking about this another book which I will refer to in further lectures as well, Enforcing Normalcy by Leonard J. Davis, right. It is all about norm and disability, right. So, there is a connection of disability and norms. Let us look at this norms. In the context of disability, Norms can refer to societal or cultural expectations and standards. Remember this term, societal and cultural expectation and standards related to individual with disabilities. These norms influence perceptions, attitudes and behavior towards people with disabilities. Here are a few aspects of a norm in the context of disability. Social norms, attitudes and perception. Social norms shape how people perceive disabilities. Cultural norms can influence whether disability are viewed as a natural part of a human diversity or as a deviation from a perceived norm. Stigma and stereotypes. Norms contribute to the creation of stigma and stereotypes associated with disability. Negative stereotype can lead to social inclusion and discrimination, right. So, before I move further, what I mean to say, why did I ask you to remember the term called societal and cultural expectations or standards, right. What I mean by this? Let me take a very more easy thinking for you to understand this. When I say cultural expectations, societal expectations, right, it means to say that in a particular society, right, because every society has a different societal and cultural expectations, right. I have been talking about this in the previous lecture as well, where I talked that how every community, every culture speaks about the body differently, which means to say that every culture thinks about, has different expectations from us. So, for example, let us say for example, I am sure that you think that people say that, oh, you have grown up to this particular age, but you are not married, right, or you should do that, oh, you cannot do this, I am so sorry for you, right. So on, so everyone has certain expectations from us. When we are not able to meet that expectations, when that expectations are not met, or certain standards when we are not able to meet, and that become a conditions of you being stereotyped, you being stigmatized, right. So, norm is created not only by law, also by movies, let us say culture, films, media, they all come together and they are responsible for creating norms, right. So, what I am trying to make a simple understanding here is that, let us say for example, why someone is called disabled? Why is it so that people with disabilities are ridiculed? Why is it so that they are stigmatized? The very reason is that there is expectations, there is a cultural expectations from every individuals that they should be able to walk, they should be able to run, or they should be able to do this. And if they fail to do this because of their physical limitations, they are being ridiculed. This is called norms, right. So, when you say this is normal, think for a second, when you say this is normal for me, or how really this is not normal for you, which means to say you expect someone to do this or to follow this or to comply with this, and if they fail or if they resist, this is where the problem starts, right. So, saying something normal is a very has a very political implications, and that is why we should question that. All right. So far, I think we are good. Let us move to the next idea. Built environment. Norms related to the design of public spaces, buildings and transportation systems impact the accessibility for individuals with disabilities. Inaccessible environment can create barriers to full participation and inclusion, right. Emerging norms in architecture and design emphasize universal design principles, aiming to create environment and product that are accessible to people of all abilities without the need for separate accommodations, right. So, for example, I am sure that you must have noticed everywhere in your everyday life that I mean, I can relate it, I am not sure about you, but I am sure that you can do experiment. Most of the offices, most of the buildings, most of the malls, like today things are different, but still there are, you can see that they do not have ramps, they have stairs. because of the two reasons. Because when they are buildings, that architecture, when they are constructing it, they always think that people with disabilities are not going to come, and it's only meant for those who have two legs and two hands, right. So this is what like thinking normally, so called, is norms, right. But they fail to understand that when your building is inaccessible, how can a disabled person can come and access that, right. And that becomes a reason of their invisibility in the mainstream society, right. So most of structure, most of the constructed building, if you go and notice that, they are inaccessible to people with disabilities, because for them it's normal that everyone has a hand and legs, they can access this. So they fail to see that there are certain percentage of a population everywhere present who have a problem in accessing that building, but problem is that they think so called normally, right. So far I think I am pretty clear, but when I will take up a further lecture, if the problem emerges, I will make this clear for you. Let us look at another term called Divyang. I am sure that you all are very familiar with this term called Divyang, which was popularized by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, when in a lecture he was talking about, and didn't he say that I am not comfortable with the Biklang, and now from now onwards I call them Divyang, right. And then onwards this particular term called Divyang became so popular, and obviously as you all know that it became under scrutiny by people or scholars who are working in this field and across disciplines. So what I am going to do, I am not going to more politicize it or think about it all the perspectives, but rather I will give you a clear picture what we mean as like what disability studies people think about this term called Divyang. All right. So look at this term first. Divyang is a term used in India to refer to person with disabilities. The word Divyang is a combination of two Sanskrit words, Divya means divine and Ang meaning body. The term is intended to emphasize the positive aspects and potential abilities of individuals with disabilities, highlighting their unique strength and contribution rather than focusing solely on their limitations. The use of a term Divyang is a part of an effort to promote a more inclusive and respectful language when discussing people with disabilities. It aims to foster a mindset that recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of individuals regardless of their physical, sensory, intellectual or other impairments. The term is part of a broader initiative to create a more inclusive and accessible society for people with disabilities in India. So, as I said, I am not going to talk more on or in detail about what Divyang is, because if I am going to speak about Divyang, trust me, it is going to take more than 1 hour, right, because it is more debatable, contestable, people have talked different ways. But just to make you understand that maybe Divyang was used so that the term Biklang, which people use it negatively, can be replaced by the term called Divyang, which basically means, as I suggested, divine and body. So it is referring to the unique abilities of people with disabilities, right. So it means to say that their unique sensory experiences or their visual understanding. So these are basically saying that they have a different ability, this acknowledging their worth in our society, and that is why the word Divyang was coined in our society. It was also meant to use this word so that an inclusive society can be created, so that people with disability can be promoted in our society, where the people with disability who are called Biklang are excluded, right. So that was a particular objective why this particular term was coined by our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji, right. So moving to the next term is called deformity, right. Again, deformity is also most of the time synonymously used with disabled people, with disability. But as I say, disability is something, it's like a kind of a layer which is present everywhere, but thinking that this is the only layer, that is a wrong way, right. So, which is why deformity may have a connection with disability, but saying that a deformed body is a disabled body, again I beg to differ here, right. So, what is a deformity? Let us look at what is. Let us look at the slide first. Deformity refers to a notable divergence in the form, color or another aspect of the body's outward presentation compared to the predetermined average body shape within the community. According to Oxford English Dictionary, deformity is characterized by the quality or condition. Look at this, this is a very important. By the quality or condition of being marred or disfigured in appearance, disfigurement, unsightliness, ugliness. This condition typically arises from accidents, birth complications, genetic mutations or hormonal irregularities. This term raises significant concern as it relies on two assumptions: the existence of the so called normal body against which deviations are measured, and the idea that communities have universally agreed upon certain attributes defining deformity. It is crucial to recognize that concept of deformity is context dependent and influenced by power dynamics. Remember these two terms, this is very significant. Let us say for example, an individual who possesses physical attributes common to their ancestry or culture, which might be perceived as deformities by those from different cultural backgrounds. Throughout history, deformity has been linked to various beliefs such as bad omens, association with demons or being considered as wizards. In some instances, deformed infants were sacrificed in rituals. Conversely, certain cultures revered deformed individuals, considering them holy, leading them to assume roles as shamans or priests. For example, right. So, what I mean to say that when we are looking at the very idea of deformity, let us say for example, when you go up even in India, I do not want to talk about this in more detailed way, but I am sure that you can understand the person who is coming from a different society, sometimes he is considered as a disabled because of his different physical appearance, and we fail to understand that this is a culture or this is how people of that community look like, right. But when we look at from our culture, we think that they are disfigured or they are suffering from some disability, right. This is more about a particular culture, it is not necessarily disability, and as we know that we are constantly under the pressure of homogenization and hegemonization, right, that everyone should look like same, or everyone should have a white face, or everyone should have a this much height or this much, so on and so forth. But this is an important concern of disability studies, that we all going to question, that we all going to bring up this idea that it is not necessarily belong to a particular culture, but rather, right, this is how humans are. Why we are constantly imposing so called normal attitude on individuals? Because that is a problematic, and that is what disability contests with, that is what disability studies question, that is what people from disability studies are going to argue and engage with, right. So, coming to the next term, which is extremely significant and is very much often used in disability studies, and also in my coming lectures I will be speaking about it, right. So, this is called freak. The term freak, look at the slide please. The term freak historically has been used to describe an individual's or object that deviates from the norm or considered abnormal, often in terms of physical appearance, behavior or abilities. However, its usage has evolved and today it is generally considered offensive and disrespectful when applied to people, right. So, this is what we need to notice, that it is an individual or object that deviates. Remember this term, deviation, right. Why we all are so much concerned about that one must not deviate, right, or deviation should not be there. This is something is a very important concern of disability studies. Remember this, because when we talk about norm, what does norm do? Norm forces us for assimilations, right, assimilations. It does not allow deviation, but disability studies constantly talk about deviations, right. So, you should not deviate from the norm. So, in past the term has sometimes used in the context of freak shows, where individuals with unusual physical characteristics or abilities were exhibited for public entertainment, and this practice has been widely criticized for exploiting and dehumanizing individual with differences. Satji Bartman, like I wish like you can Google and see this picture of this woman, was a famous exhibit and was imported for display in England and France during the 1810s. He was displayed as a symbol of sexual deviance and racial inferiority because of the large breast and buttocks typical of the South African tribe she was born into, right. So, this is why I was talking about that, why it is important to look at this. The freak, as in the South Asian tribes, this was quite common, this was quite normal, but it was shown everywhere that how this kind of a people, right, who look like this in color, in physical appearances, they are racially inferior, intellectually deviant to from white people, right. So, freak is something again culturally should be studied, but most of the time people think it's a disabled attributes, right. Look at the next term, which is very significant, again called crip. Look at the slide. The crip has been historically associated with disability community, particularly within the context of disability rights and activism movement. It is often used as a form of self-identification by some individuals with disabilities, reclaiming the term to foster a sense of community and empowerment. The use of a crip as a self-identifier is a deliberate effort to challenge stereotypes and stigma associated with disabilities. By reclaiming and embracing the term, some individuals aim to redefine and reshape societal perception of disability, promoting a positive and empowering narrative. It is very essential to note that language can be subjective, and not all individuals with the disability community may embrace or use this term. Moreover, preferences for language may vary among individuals, and it is crucial to respect how individuals choose to identify themselves. Always prioritize using language that is respectful and considerate of individual preferences and sensitivities, right. So, this is what is about the crip, and the next is stigma, which again I am going to speak very explained way in the coming lectures, but just to give you a pretty sense what stigma is, it refers to a set of negative and often unfair beliefs or attitudes that society holds towards a particular group of people or certain characteristics. Stigmatization can lead to the societal rejection, discrimination or marginalization of individuals who possess that characteristics, whether it be related to health condition, mental health, disabilities, ethnicity, gender identity or other factor. It can manifest in various ways, including stereotypes, prejudices, discriminatory behavior. It can be a significant barrier to social inclusion, preventing individuals from fully participating in various aspects of life such as education, employment or relationship. Stigmatized individuals may experience feeling of shame, embarrassment and isolation as a result of societal attitudes. So, this is a very important book. Why I am talking about this, I will recommend you to read that, Notes on the Management of Notes on the Management of Spoiled Identity, right? That's a book by Stigma. That's a sorry, I'm sorry. That's a book by Erving Goffman on stigma, and this is a very interesting and enriching book when we are reading it, so that you can relate and you can understand. I mean, in stigma, you will see that it's not on disability, but people or scholars who are working in this field, they have borrowed, they have used this book extensively in analyzing the theory or analyzing the discriminatory attitudes of the normal people when they are looking at disabled people. So, what I am doing in this lecture number 2, which is terms associated with disabilities. So, these are the important terms which are extensively often used in our everyday course of life. And when we are looking at people with disabilities, when we are going to analyze it, these are the terms which are going to come every day. Let us say disability, impairment, disease, stigma, normals, norms, freak. So, these are the terms which are not supposed to be just taken as it is used in dictionary, but rather our job is to unfold them, to decode them, to analyze them, that how scholars have also examined it. For example, the last term that I was explaining to you is called stigma. Stigma, what is the reason that someone is stigmatized? Someone is stigmatized because someone deviates from the norms. Again, look at this: stigma, disability, and now third is deviation. Deviation from where? Deviation from societal expectation. That is something called being normal, right? If you are not being normal, which means you are being stigmatized. But again, what is called someone being normal or something being normal? Why we are so much obsessed of the term called normal? Why is it constantly everyone wants, like everyone has to be hegemonized or homogenized? So, these are the important question that we need to raise when we are looking at disability studies. Our job is to analyze, our job is to examine these terms. In fact, I would request you that before you venture into this field, our job is, or like everyone's job is, that look at these terms politically, like what these terms politically mean, and how these terms culturally evolved, and how these terms are being accepted, circulated, percolated in our society, and later on that how these terms have a connection or relation with people with disabilities. So, these are the important significant question that we need to raise, right. So, in this lecture what I tried to do is that I picked up some 10 important key terms that are associated with people with disabilities, or let us say disability studies, or let us say minority identities, and we are not going to confuse further when we are looking at the term disease, deformity, freak, stigma, disability, impairment, handicap, so on and so forth, right. So, in the third lecture, when we are going to meet up, we are going to talk in detail about disability and norms. All right. So, for now I am going to end it up, and I am requesting you to read book by Erving Goffman for sure, so that you can understand it better when I am moving to the next lecture. All right. Thank you so much. See you next time. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.